welcome to Fantasy Football Weekly. I'm Amber Wilson, and joining me is senior fantasy football writer Jamey Eisenberg. And Jamey, got to start the show, of course, talking about Brett Favre. I think this subject has probably been beat to death, but let's go ahead and do it, because Favre wants to come back, wants to play football. The Packers won't release him, saying you could possibly be Aaron Rodgers' backup, because Aaron Rodgers is our guy. What is going to go on with this situation?
Did you ever imagine Brett Favre as a backup?
Right? No, not at all.
You know, Amber, it's just an interesting scenario, the fact that Brett Favre could potentially be stuck in a situation here where he may not be able to play in 2008 even though he wants to. Although, the situation changes almost minute by minute, day by day with what Favre and his agents say, what the Packers have been saying. It looks like right now from a fantasy football perspective, you still want to draft Brett Favre probably as a low-end number 2 guy at this point. But as the season gets closer, as we have more information, if he is a starter for the Packers or somewhere else, you're going to draft him, probably in that scenario somewhere between the 6th and the 10th quarterback, behind guys like Anderson and Palmer and Roethlisberger, ahead of maybe guys like Hasselbeck and McNabb and even, Jay Cutler and Mark Bulger. So he's going to fall somewhere in that group if he's a starting quarterback in 2008. But as of right now, again, you still want to take him somewhere around round 10, round 11, just because if, in fact, he does come back, he could have a lot of value for fantasy owners. And when Aaron Rodgers, when you're looking at him, he's a number 2 guy no matter what. If he's starting, if he's a backup, you're not going to draft him. But if he is starting, you're going to take him around round 12, round 13 to be that number 2 option for you.
Very interesting. Waiting to see how that one's going to play out in Green Bay. Let's go from quarterbacks to running backs here. Oakland has made it pretty obvious that they don't want Lamont Jordan back. Lamont Jordan now looking around at his options. Detroit, he's looking towards them, might be interested. Also, Kevin Jones, he's looking towards Tampa Bay. Let's go ahead and both of these guys impact players. Both of these guys are going to have an effect on fantasy rosters. So go ahead and start with Lamont Jordan for me.
Sure. As we know, with Oakland, they drafted Darren McFadden. They signed Justin Fargas. They re-signed him to a new contract this offseason. So the Raiders have no need for Lamont Jordan, along with Michael Bush being back for the Raiders this year. So he's looking around. They made it clear, don't come into training camp. We're not going to have you on the roster. There's a potential trade option maybe with Detroit that a scenario could be developing there. Or he's going to probably look to explore some of his other options depending on when he's released. So if Lamont Jordan goes to Detroit, that's going to be an interesting scenario because they do have Kevin Smith, the rookie from Central Florida, who has a chance to be a very good producer this year for fantasy users as a rookie. They also have Tatum Bell, a guy who fell out of favor with Mike Martz but stayed in Detroit. So the Detroit running back situation could be a little bit dicey if Lamont Jordan comes there. I still think you're going to take Kevin Smith as the number 1 running back for the Lions. Lamont Jordan would be number 2 ahead of Tatum Bell if he ends up in Detroit. Depending on where else Lamont Jordan goes, that will sort of determine his fantasy value. Although, Amber, I don't know if Dave has told you, Dave Richard, that Lamont Jordan is his super sleeper for 2008.
Oh, is he? Wow.
Yes.
All right,
now,
so
as
note
for
of that, guys. So Kevin Jones, how realistic is this Tampa Bay trade here?
Well,
is it really gonna happen?
Kevin Jones held a private workout, and several teams came to look at him. The Dolphins were one, Pittsburgh was another, and Tampa Bay was one of the 4 teams, I believe, to look at Jones in his offseason workout. I think Detroit was the 4th, which is interesting considering that's where he was. So,
correct.
With Kevin Jones, it's interesting because he had 2 injuries the past 2 seasons: the foot injury coming into 2007, and the knee injury now that sidelined him at the end of last year, going to keep him potentially a little slow coming into this year, although all reports say that he's fine. So depending on where Kevin Jones ends up will sort of determine, again, his fantasy value, but a guy who's been successful in the past. If he goes to Tampa Bay, though, that's going to be terrible because, as we know, Ernest Graham is the starter there. They brought in Warrick Dunn, back after he had some years in Atlanta. And then Cadillac Williams is a guy who's trying to make a comeback from a knee injury of his own. Although it looks like Cadillac Williams, some reports out of Tampa Bay say that he's going to be on the PUP list to start the season, which will keep him out the first 6 weeks. That could help Kevin Jones if he does end up in Tampa Bay. But I don't want to see Kevin Jones go to the Bucs because it'll hurt Ernest Graham, it'll hurt Warrick Dunn, it'll eventually hurt Cadillac Williams. Right. So if you're Kevin Jones, please listen, go somewhere else because we want to have Ernest Graham as a good fantasy option.
Okay, let's move to the wideout position now. There's some third-year guys here to talk about, and of course, third year is when we expect receivers to really break out of their shell and really make an impact for you guys out there. But there's some third-year guys, big names, but with some troubles surrounding them. Brandon Marshall, Greg Jennings, Marcus Colston. What's going to happen with these 3 guys, considering the issues that are around them?
Sure. Well, Brandon Marshall, we know, is dealing with some off-field troubles, also with the arm injury that could limit some of his potential. Greg Jennings, as we talked about earlier, the wide receiver for the Packers. Depending on who his quarterback is, that will sort of determine his fantasy value. If it's Brett Favre, he goes up. If it's Aaron Rodgers, he takes a little bit of a hit, but he's still a solid number 2. And then Marquez Colston, who's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL for New Orleans, dealing with a little bit of a contract situation, which may or may not linger into training camp. He says he's going to be there. That's the word out of New Orleans. Hopefully he shows up and nothing will trouble him with the start of his season. So those 3 guys should be okay, but it could lower their fantasy value a little bit. But Amber, there are some guys coming into their third year that have a lot of upside, just because third year, again, is typically the year when wide receivers have breakout. Santonio Holmes falls into this list, even though he's been sort of a very productive player at this point, but still a guy that has a little bit more room to grow. There's some other guys like Ben Obomanu, who has a chance to start for Seattle. Chad Jackson, the guy that you're familiar with your Florida days, a guy who's been really a disappointment for New England. But now with no Dante Stallworth, he has a chance to compete for that third spot, along with Jabbar Gaffney, another Gator, who has a chance, to play very well. We're looking at Maurice Stovall. Tampa Bay is in dire need of wide receiver help, so he's a guy to keep an eye on, maybe in later, in deeper leagues with a later pick. Derek Hagan, a guy for the Dolphins, they're looking for receiver help because of Ted Ginn Jr.
They're looking for all kinds of help.
They're looking for all kinds of help, exactly. And then Sonoris Moss is a guy who's been a little bit of a disappointment for the Giants, but again, third-year guy going to compete with Steve Smith for that third role there for New York. And then a guy who a lot of people like is Demetrius Williams, a wide receiver for the Ravens. Again, depending on what their quarterback situation could be, Demetrius Williams is a guy that you could take deeper in draft. So there are some guys, at the top of this list that are very productive, and some other guys that could really, be some decent sleepers this year in 2008.
All right, Jamey. Well, thank you for all of your helpful analysis, getting us ready for fantasy football season. You better keep your mouse right here at CBSSports.com for everything you need to know in the world of sports. And if you missed anything here today, you better stop, refresh, and rewatch. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Amber Wilson. Have a good one.